The night before my son's wedding, I stood in the living room, silently watching his fiancée, Rachel, as she made her way toward me. She wasn't smiling, her face stone cold and serious, as though she was about to deliver a bombshell. I could feel my heart racing as I tried to figure out what was happening. The wedding was supposed to be tomorrow, a day of joy, celebration, and new beginnings. But Rachel's words shattered the calm of the evening. "After tomorrow, you are not part of this family," she said, looking me directly in the eyes, her voice low and chilling. "So don't show up." Her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and I froze. The room seemed to grow smaller with every passing second. I couldn't breathe, couldn't comprehend what she had just said. What did she mean? Why would she say something like that the night before the wedding? I had tried to be supportive, to welcome her into our family with open arms, but it felt like all that was about to come crashing down. I wanted to say something, to demand an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. It felt as if my throat had tightened, suffocating any chance of a response. My son, Daniel, was upstairs, preparing for his big day, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I stared at Rachel, trying to make sense of the situation. Was this a cruel joke? Or was there something more behind it? My mind raced with questions, but one thing was certain: I had to get to the bottom of this. The silence between us stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I managed to find my voice. "Why would you say that?" I asked, my words barely above a whisper. Rachel didn't flinch. She simply turned her back on me and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there in a daze. The sound of her footsteps echoed down the hallway as I struggled to process what had just happened. But as I stood there, trying to make sense of everything, a cold realization washed over me. Something wasn't right. Rachel had always been kind and respectful, so what had changed? What was her true intention behind those words? The next morning, as the sun began to rise, I woke up with a heavy heart. The wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life, but it seemed like everything was falling apart. I had barely slept, my mind consumed with what Rachel had said. I needed answers, but I feared what I might uncover. As I stepped into the kitchen, I saw my son pacing back and forth, his face a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He was so ready for the day ahead, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. But then, a phone call came. It was from Rachel. I watched as Daniel answered, his face slowly turning pale. He said a few words into the phone, his voice cracking with disbelief. My heart sank. This was it, the moment that would change everything. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "The wedding, it's not happening today." I froze, the blood draining from my face. What was going on? What had Rachel done? And then, the phone call ended. I looked at my son, who was now standing in front of me, his face filled with shock and confusion. He hadn't expected this, neither had I. But now, nothing made sense. Why had Rachel stopped the wedding? What was her reason? And more importantly, how was I going to fix this? The silence that followed felt unbearable, like the calm before the storm. Something had gone terribly wrong, and I had no idea where to start unraveling the truth. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let Rachel tear our family apart. I would fight to get the answers we needed. And I would make sure that the truth, whatever it was, would come to light. But as the day dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something even darker was looming just ahead. A truth that would change everything. And I had no idea how much worse it could get. The wedding didn't happen, and neither did the answers. The day dragged on in a haze of confusion and unanswered questions. Daniel and I sat in the living room, the phone call still hanging between us like a heavy weight. Neither of us knew what had just happened, but we both felt the same sense of dread growing with each passing minute. I watched my son, his usual energy replaced with an eerie stillness. He was no longer the excited groom-to-be, but a young man in shock, trying to piece together what had just been taken from him. The dream of marrying the woman he loved was slipping through his fingers, and I could see the pain in his eyes, even though he was trying to hide it. "I don't understand, Mom," he muttered, his voice breaking. "Why would she do this? Why would she stop the wedding?" I didn't have an answer. I was just as lost as he was. Everything had seemed perfect up until that moment. Rachel had been the ideal fiancé, warm, loving, and respectful. So what had happened? What could have possibly driven her to call off the wedding just hours before the ceremony? I tried to comfort Daniel, telling him that we would figure it out. But the words felt hollow. What was there to figure out when the person you thought you knew so well turned their back on you without explanation? How do you begin to mend something you don't even understand? Just as I was about to speak again, the doorbell rang. Daniel and I both turned to look at the door, unsure of who it could be. No one was supposed to be here. Rachel had made it clear that this was her decision, and we weren't part of it. But there was no denying the urgency in the air. Something told me that whoever was at that door might have the answers we were looking for. I opened the door to find Rachel's sister, Emily, standing on the other side. Her eyes were red from crying, and her body language screamed of someone who had just experienced a great personal loss. She didn't wait for me to say anything before speaking. "I'm so sorry," Emily said, her voice full of sorrow. I tried to talk Rachel out of it. I really did. But she's made up her mind. She's not going through with the wedding. I felt a surge of frustration bubble up inside me. Why would she do this? What happened? Emily looked down at the ground, her hands trembling as she fidgeted with the strap of her bag. It's complicated," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel didn't just call off the wedding because of something you did. She has a secret, something she's been hiding for months." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What kind of secret? What are you talking about?" Emily hesitated, glancing behind her as though she feared someone might be listening. "Rachel, she's been seeing someone else. Someone from her past." She didn't want to tell Daniel, but she realized she couldn't go through with the wedding knowing that she was still in love with him. I was stunned. This wasn't just a lover's quarrel or a misunderstanding. This was betrayal at its worst. How could Rachel have been so dishonest, so manipulative? And why hadn't she told Daniel the truth before now? The wedding had been planned for months, and she had kept this secret hidden all along. "Where is she now?" I demanded, my anger rising. "Is she here? Is she going to explain herself?" Emily shook her head, her face pale. "No, she left. She said she couldn't face any of you. She's gone to be with him." I was speechless. The room felt like it was spinning. The woman my son had planned to marry, the woman who had been so kind and loving, had betrayed him in the worst way possible. And now she was gone, leaving a trail of heartbreak and unanswered questions behind her. Daniel, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. His voice was raw, filled with pain and disbelief. "I don't understand, how could she do this to me? After everything." His words cut through me like a knife. I wanted to tell him that everything would be okay, that we could fix this somehow. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Rachel had broken something that couldn't be easily repaired. And the worst part was, I couldn't protect him from the hurt she had caused. As Emily stood there, I realized something. This wasn't just about Rachel and Daniel anymore. This was about a betrayal that went far deeper than I had ever imagined. And now, the only question that remained was, how far would Rachel go to get what she wanted? I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The truth was out, but this was just the beginning. The days after Rachel's abrupt departure were a blur. Daniel locked himself away in his room, refusing to speak to anyone. It broke my heart to see him like this. He had always been so full of life, so optimistic. But now, he was a shadow of himself, hurt, betrayed, and unable to understand why the woman he was about to marry could do this to him. I tried my best to comfort him, but there was nothing I could say that would take away the pain. What Rachel had done was beyond cruel. It was a betrayal that would leave scars for years to come. But even though I knew Daniel needed me, I couldn't help but feel a simmering anger. Rachel's actions had not only shattered my son's heart, but they had also shattered the trust I had placed in her. She had come into our lives, seemed so genuine, and made promises to our family. And yet, she had chosen to break it all for a man from her past. That kind of betrayal wasn't something you could just forget. As the days passed, I kept wondering where Rachel was, what she was doing, and who this man from her past was. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I needed answers. I wasn't going to let her get away with hurting my son and walking off into the sunset as if nothing had happened. One evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to sit by and let Rachel's betrayal go unanswered. I had to confront her. She owed Daniel an explanation, and I wasn't going to let her avoid it. I called Emily, Rachel's sister, to ask if she knew where Rachel had gone. She was hesitant at first, but after a long pause, she reluctantly agreed to help me. "I don't know where she is exactly, but I know she's staying with him," Emily said quietly. "I can give you his address, but I'm warning you, Rachel doesn't want to be found. She's made her decision." I took the address from Emily, feeling a rush of determination. This wasn't just about confronting Rachel. It was about showing her that she couldn't just walk away from the consequences of her actions. She had hurt my son, and now, it was time to make her face it. The next morning, I drove to the address Emily had given me. The neighborhood was quiet, with tree-lined streets and well-kept houses. It looked like any other suburban area, peaceful and normal. But inside, I knew there was chaos. And I was about to walk right into it. I parked the car across the street and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. My heart was racing. I had no idea what I would find when I walked up to that door, but I was ready to face whatever came next. This was something that had to be done, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked toward the house. As I approached the front door, my mind raced with 1,000 questions. Was Rachel here? Would she be willing to talk? What would I do if she refused to answer me? I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Seconds passed, and the door slowly opened. Standing in front of me was a man I had never seen before. He looked like someone from Rachel's past, someone she had clearly been hiding from us. His face was unfamiliar, but his eyes held a coldness that made my stomach churn. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and guarded. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "I'm looking for Rachel. I need to talk to her." The man's expression didn't change. He didn't even flinch at the mention of her name. "Rachel isn't here," he said flatly. "And I don't think she wants to talk to you." I couldn't believe it. I had come all this way, had built up all this courage, and now this man was standing in front of me, blocking my path. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What have you done to her? Why is she doing this to my son?" The man's eyes narrowed. He seemed unfazed by my anger. "Rachel made her choice," he said quietly. "And it's none of your business." I felt a surge of frustration, but before I could say anything else, the door slammed shut in my face. The sound of it reverberated in my ears, leaving me standing there, stunned and speechless. I stood there for a few moments, processing what had just happened. The door was closed, Rachel was gone, and I still didn't have the answers I was looking for. But I couldn't give up now. I knew something was off. This man, this stranger, was involved in something much bigger than I had realized. And just as I turned to leave, a voice called out from behind me. It was Emily. She had followed me without my knowledge, and she was running toward me, looking frantic. "Wait. You need to hear this," she panted, trying to catch her breath. "I found out something. Something that could change everything." I turned around, my curiosity piqued. What could she possibly have found out? What was the secret Rachel was hiding? And why had Emily followed me here? Just as Emily was about to speak, a figure stepped out of the house. It was Rachel. She stood there, looking at me with an unreadable expression on her face. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "You should have never come here," Rachel said, her voice cold and distant. "And now, you'll regret it." And just like that, the story took another shocking turn. The words hung in the air like a thick fog. "You should have never come here," Rachel repeated, her voice colder than I had ever heard it. She stood at the threshold of the door, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes daring me to challenge her. I couldn't believe it. The woman I had welcomed into my family, the one who had promised to love my son, was now threatening me. Her presence was suffocating, and I felt a sense of dread creeping up on me. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct told me to turn around and walk away. But I couldn't. I had come this far, and there was no way I was leaving without answers. "What do you mean, Rachel?" I asked, my voice strained, though I could feel the anger building inside me. "What are you going to do? I just want to understand why you're doing this to Daniel. Why you've torn apart our family." Rachel's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read. A flicker of guilt. Or maybe just cold resolve. She took a step forward, but her gaze remained as distant as ever. "You're the last person I owe an explanation to," she said quietly. "Everything that's happened is because of you, anyway. If you had stayed out of it, maybe I wouldn't have had to make these choices." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "What are you talking about? How have I been involved in this?" Rachel let out a bitter laugh, her expression darkening. "You've been too controlling. You've been trying to force your way into my relationship with Daniel from the very beginning. You've never liked me, and you've made it impossible for me to be happy. So don't stand there pretending that this is all my fault." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. The air around me seemed to thicken as I processed what she was saying. I had always tried to support Daniel's choices, to welcome Rachel into our family, but now I was being accused of controlling her life. Of somehow sabotaging their relationship. Rachel's bitterness was like a poison, seeping into every word she spoke. I could see the woman who had once seemed kind and loving had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. This wasn't just a woman who had fallen out of love with my son. This was someone who had spent months harboring resentment, and now, she was finally letting it out in the cruelest way possible. "I never wanted to control you," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I wanted what was best for Daniel. I wanted you to be a part of this family. But now you're destroying everything." Rachel didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked over her shoulder at the man I had seen earlier, the one who had answered the door. He was standing in the background, watching us silently, his arms folded. There was something about him that unsettled me, something cold and calculating. But I didn't have time to focus on him. I had to get through to Rachel. "Do you even care about Daniel?" I asked, my voice rising in frustration. "Do you care about him at all?" For a moment, Rachel hesitated. Her eyes flickered, almost as if she were questioning herself. But then the moment passed, and the wall came back up. She shook her head, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "I care about myself, and that's all that matters," she said, her words sharp and final. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't the woman I had welcomed into our family. This wasn't the woman Daniel had fallen in love with. This was someone who had abandoned everything, family, loyalty, love, all for herself. "You're selfish," I spat, my anger overwhelming me. "You've destroyed everything Daniel has worked for. Do you even realize what you've done?" Rachel's eyes darkened, her gaze hardening. "You're not part of this anymore," she said. "So get out. This is over." It hit me like a punch to the gut. Rachel was completely shutting me out. She was cutting ties with my family, with everything we had built together. The wedding had been her way of making promises, of telling us that we were part of her life. But now, all of it was gone, and there was nothing left but the wreckage. I stood there, seething with anger and disbelief, but something inside me snapped. I had spent too many years trying to be understanding, trying to make everything work, only to be met with betrayal at every turn. I couldn't stand there any longer, letting Rachel tear everything apart. I had to fight back. I turned to Emily, who had been standing silently by my side this whole time. Her eyes were wide, full of fear and uncertainty. She had never wanted any of this, and now she was caught in the middle. I could see that she was afraid of what Rachel might do next. But before I could speak, Rachel's voice cut through the air again. "If you don't leave right now, I'll make sure you never see Daniel again," she said, her voice low and menacing. It was as if a switch had been flipped. Rachel was no longer just the woman who had betrayed my son. She was now a threat, someone willing to go to any lengths to keep me out of Daniel's life. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about something far darker. Rachel wasn't going to stop. She had her claws in deep, and she wasn't about to let go. I looked at Emily, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to make a choice. I had to act fast, or I might lose everything. But before I could take another step, the door behind me flew open, and someone else stepped into view. It was Daniel. He looked at me, his face a mix of confusion, hurt, and rage. His eyes were filled with tears, but his voice was steady as he spoke. Daniel stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt. His eyes darted from me to Rachel and then to Emily, who was standing quietly beside me, her face pale and filled with fear. The weight of the moment hung heavily in the air, thick with tension. My son had just walked in at the worst possible time, and I could see that the truth he was about to hear would change everything. "Mom, what's going on? What is all this? Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel's voice broke the silence, a sharp, painful question that pierced through my heart. I felt a lump rise in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I had never wanted Daniel to know the full extent of Rachel's betrayal, not like this, not in the middle of all the chaos. But now, it was too late to hide the truth. Rachel stood still, her eyes cold and unrepentant. She didn't even look at Daniel as he stood there, his face filled with pain. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest, her expression guarded, as if daring him to confront her. "Rachel, what's going on?" Daniel repeated, his voice rising. "Why did you stop everything? Why did you tell my mom to leave?" Rachel finally turned to face him, her expression hard as she spoke. "Because it's over, Daniel. I'm done pretending." Daniel's face twisted in confusion and hurt. "Pretending? What are you talking about?" The tension in the room felt unbearable. I knew this was the moment where everything would come crashing down. It was time for Rachel to face the truth. "You don't have to do this, Rachel," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and sadness. "You've hurt him enough. Now just tell him the truth." Rachel met my eyes, her expression filled with disdain. "The truth," she repeated. "Fine. The truth is, I've never loved him the way he loved me. And I've been hiding something for months, a man from my past. He's the one I've always wanted, and I couldn't go through with this wedding, knowing that." Daniel's face went pale. His lips trembled as he struggled to process what Rachel was saying. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had thought would be his future, had been lying to him all along. It wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was betrayal at the deepest level. I saw his hands ball into fists, his body trembling with emotion as he struggled to keep his composure. "So, you've been seeing someone else this whole time?" he asked, his voice breaking with disbelief. "And you couldn't even tell me? You couldn't even give me a chance to understand?" Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't even seem to feel the weight of her words. She simply nodded, her face devoid of any real remorse. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said, though the apology sounded empty. "But this is how it has to be." The room fell silent. I could hear Daniel's shallow breaths, the pain etched across his face as he processed what had just been revealed. I wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, but I knew that nothing I said would make this better. The damage was done. And then, something shifted in him. The hurt in his eyes began to change, into something harder, more resolute. His face hardened, his jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw the determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to let Rachel get away with this. "You're right about one thing," Daniel said, his voice steady, though it trembled with emotion. "You're done. We're done." Rachel opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't bother," he said, his tone sharp. "I don't need someone who doesn't care about me. Someone who can betray me so easily. You're not the woman I thought you were." I could see Rachel's walls begin to crack just slightly, but she didn't say anything. She didn't even try to stop him as he took a step back, as if he was finally seeing her for who she truly was. Daniel turned to me then, his eyes filled with tears. I could see the depth of his pain, but also the strength starting to grow within him. He wasn't the boy who had fallen in love with Rachel anymore. He was a man who had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes, love isn't enough. That sometimes, the people you trust the most will betray you in ways you never imagined. "I'm sorry, Mom," Daniel whispered. "I should have listened to you. I should have seen the signs. But I didn't." I reached out and pulled him into an embrace, holding him tightly. It's not your fault, I said softly. You trusted her. And you'll learn, just like I did, that sometimes the hardest lessons come with the most pain. The door closed behind Rachel as she turned and walked away, leaving us standing in the silence of the aftermath. She was gone, and with her, the hopes of a future that would never be. But in that moment, I saw a glimpse of hope for my son. I knew it would take time, but he would heal. He would move on from this, stronger and wiser than before. And as I held him in my arms, I realized something that had become clear through all the pain and confusion. Sometimes, you have to let go of the people who hurt you in order to find the peace and happiness you deserve. Daniel had learned that the hard way. But in the end, it would be the key to his freedom.